Welcome, everybody. It is 4 o'clock, and I know you're all just coming in at the end of your day. Hopefully, this isn't the start of the day for any of you. Liberty is helping us, and she is putting right into the chat their learner guide. So you will have that all set for you as you come into our space today. We did send the note taker over the weekend to you, and I think last week, but you will have all of that for you. So you are in webinar 3 with us, and the chat is disabled, but you can definitely put questions in the Q&A. We will be using polls again, so just select the answer that's the best one for you when we launch those polls today. And also, if you need closed captioning, you can feel free to just choose that and it will start showing up right on your screen for you. And we already have a question in the Q&A. Okay, we will look at those and give answers as we can. So we're in webinar 3, and today we're going to think about alphabet knowledge and high frequency words and dig into that a bunch because there's a lot to be thinking about that in terms of what goes on in our classrooms. We will be able to meet some of the expectations from all of our bullets on our agenda for this work in our webinar series. So we are going to get knowledge related to the what, why, and how of foundational skills that are connected to research-supported instruction. We're going to look at ways that we can apply examples of this research-supported practice for using Essentials 4 and 5 with a little bit of Essentials 6 today. We'll also have a chance to do a really quick glimpse into Michigan Learning Channel's Read, Write, Roar before 5 o'clock, and then from 5 to 5:30, we'll dig in deep to that. And we always want to give you time to reflect on your own. And so you have that note taker guide that is linked in the learner guide, and you can just make a copy for yourself and write your notes as you go along. So here is your learner guide. I just wanted to point out it does have 2 pages in it. And there's an example of the alphabet knowledge note taker guide. And Julia and I have, we meet in between our sessions. So it says alphabet knowledge, but we're getting a lot more in this time. So it says that, but we're just extending that. So it's like a bonus for you today in our space. And again, when you get these slides and they are downloaded as a PDF, all of these things that you see on here, those links will all be live so you can get to those. For today, I did want to bring us into a space of looking at our literacy theory of action, that this is how we are working in Michigan. This is a grounding document for the literacy work that we do here. And it gives a series of if-then statements on the left that outline how each of these pieces is interconnected and dependent upon each other. But I hope that you'll notice that right in the center of this is about Michigan children, that all Michigan children develop strong literacy, knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And so the circles that are around that are all of us in our different roles and the responsibilities that we have to children that represent that work. And so each of you here is investing in children, and no matter what role you're in, so you're committing to get into the research that's going to inform your practice. So if you're here as an administrator, first of all, thank you. Really appreciate that you're here. And you're leading with your example so that coaching and classroom practice can be aligned to research when you've had this experience with us. If you're as a coach, you'll be using what you learn here to impact the ways in which you coach and support instruction with teachers. And if you're here as a teacher, you're on the front lines and you're impacting children every single day. But what this also represents is that we all need each other in order to make this happen, that each piece of this circle is really important and wraps around the children that are in front of us. So as we continue in this space, you might be considering who else you need to talk to. Like you see that we have research and practice needs to be aligned to policy. Well, in good news, the Read by Grade 3, the retention law, that looks like it's going to be fully repealed from that. So the retention isn't research supported, but coaching is. So coaching remains in that Read by Grade 3 law, but there's things we want to keep our eyes on all the time. So I just encourage you to take a look at this. There's a link to the full document when you get the PDF so that you can read through it some more. But this is really an important part of the work we do at MAISA and through the Early Literacy Task Force. And so I just thought it would be really appropriate to have you see that and to thank you for the role that you play and to make you aware of other people that we want you to just get on board with all of us in this work. And so as we lean into the essential instructional practices, we will be again looking at the K-3 practices. And we did a lot of work on Essential 4, looking at bullets 5 and 6 of Essential 4. We'll be leaning into essentials 5 and 6 more today. And when we look at essential 4, we leaned in to bullets 3 and 4. We really wanted to think about building phonological awareness, but in particular phonemic awareness, because it's just so important to children's literacy development and their ability to read and to write, or to decode and encode. And so when we thought about segmenting and blending, Dr. Lindsey gave us a lot of excellent background knowledge, and we have some tips and swaps and tricks that we can do to make this even more effective for the children in our classrooms. So there's what those bullets were for essential 4. Now let's think about essential 6, just really briefly. Like I said, we're just like briefly touching upon essential 6. Really, one of the things we'll talk about, and more so when we do the read, write, roar segment, would be around letter formation, and then a little bit on spelling strategies that we'll do with Dr. Lindsey in this session, and a little bit more connecting those to this session and the next session. But you'll see there's a lot more in essential 6. So this is not to do a disservice to that, and that those are the only pieces that you want to know all of these things, but those are the ones that we will touch upon today. So let's think about essential 5. Essential 5 is all around explicit instruction and letter sound relationships. And so it talks about the developmental stages of what this looks like earlier versus what this is going to look like later in children's development. But the piece that we're going to think about today is this last sentence here, where it says high frequency words are taught with full analysis of letter sound relationships within the words, even in those that are not spelled as would be expected. So we'll be thinking about that today. And I would like to have you just come into the space with an open mind when we think about high frequency words. And I was sharing with Julia and with Liberty before we started that there are kids I'd love to just apologize to for having them do flashcards or do word rings, because that was not good practice to just be telling them these are sight words that you just have to know them. You just have to memorize them. Like, that's actually not the reality of that. And so I just urge you to listen with an open mind and really consider what the instructional practices that you're currently using with your curricular resources. And there might be some tweaks that you need to make, because I know if I were still teaching first grade now, and I would have to switch what I used to do like 25 years ago. So I give you that as a little, vulnerability on my part, because we are learners at heart and should always be changing according to what we learn. When we know better, we do better, right? So in addition to high frequency word instruction, we'll look at bullets 1 and 3 of how we teach letter sound relationships, and that we want to be verbally precise and involve multiple channels. And Dr. Lindsey will get into that a little bit. And we also want to do these systematically and in relation to our standards. And so we're going to make sure that you have a link to the standards that's in the updated learner guide. There is a link to the Michigan standards for you today. So as we think about this later in Read, Write, Roar, we'll build upon the things that Dr. Lindsey is talking about, and we'll add in some examples of a protocol you might use for alphabet instruction, and think about how to be verbally precise in that, and using specific research-supported protocols in kindergarten. So lastly, before I hand this off to Dr. Lindsey, I just want to say that as you're thinking about your learning in here, Essential 5, I just gave like the quickest overview of that so I can get right to Dr. Lindsey, but it has many, many layers, and there's so much research that it really requires us to have deep content knowledge. So if you were to do the Essential Instructional Practices modules for Essential 5, it's an extremely comprehensive, over 2 hours of content set of modules with 10 content-rich slideshow presentations and 3 classroom videos that accompany those that were filmed right here in Michigan. So I do urge you to use those. And also Essential 6, I did a teeny tiny few words out of bullet 5. Essential 6 is 131 minutes, another over 2 hours of content that you could learn about writing all for free. And this shows the way that you can get to Essential 5, that pathway, and the same will follow for Essential 6. So we will be continuing on with more with me later with Read, Write, Roar. And now I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Lindsey.
Thank you, Annie, and welcome back to everyone. We're so excited to be back with you today. And to take up talking about more about phonics. So today we're really going to dive into thinking about letter sound relationships, both in the alphabet and beyond, and what practices we can take up in supporting children in acquiring these isolated skills, with the ultimate goal, again, of always leading them towards becoming readers and writers. This week, we're going to be thinking mostly about that whole class phonics experience and a focus on our instruction and practice. Next week, we're going to continue this thread and continue to be talking about using these sound spelling relationships even more so in the acts of decoding and encoding or spelling. And we're particularly going to add in some conversation about how we can support children in applying these skills in context. So if you think about kind of the arc of these 2 weeks, that's kind of how we're going to be ending our time together as we are coming shockingly to a close of this webinar series. So today is really about chapters 6 and 7 in the book. And if you didn't get a chance to read it, that's completely fine. But when you get your book, if you haven't gotten it yet, or if you haven't started reading yet, those are the chapters that are going to most mirror this particular webinar. All right. Ooh, there we go. All right, so in this session, we're really going to be talking in 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about the alphabet. There's actually a lot of research specifically on alphabet acquisition. So we're going to first dive into talking about the alphabet and our instructional swap around the alphabet. Then we're going to move into some additional knowledge about sound spelling relationships, primarily beyond the alphabet. And we're going to talk about how we can support children in continuing to gain automaticity in those. And finally, we're going to talk about high frequency words, because we really can't talk about phonics without talking about high frequency words and discussing what does research tell us right now is best practice in teaching children these high frequency words. So to begin, a quick recap. Over our time together, we've been focusing in on decoding, and we started off all of our sessions by conceptualizing some of the models that we have for trying to understand what reading is. And so one of the models that we talked about was the simple view, which shows us that reading comprehension is essentially the product of decoding and language comprehension, and that if either of these elements is at 0, then we are not going to have reading comprehension. And we're focusing in this webinar series on decoding because it is utterly essential for student success, and because we need to bring more precision to this instructional experience for children to ensure that they're given the best ability to become proficient readers. Underlying decoding, there are many elements, and we focused over our time together on some of those elements. We focused first on understanding kind of the breadth of what decoding is and why it's so important. And we then last time talked about phonemic awareness and the utter essentialness of the ability for us to hear and manipulate individual phonemes or sounds in language. This time, we're going to be focusing on that alphabet and sound spelling knowledge and thinking about how all of these components together combine in the moment to allow us to decode words. And then along with vocabulary, allow us towards that ability to have orthographically mapped a word, have a memory map of the sound, the spelling, and the meaning, and then getting to that automatic word recognition, the end goal, so that we can become fluent readers and writers. We've also talked a bit about this idea about teaching decoding on purpose. This idea that we can't just expect for these elements to spontaneously come together for every child, but instead we can be far more clear and precise about teaching each individual element to its best level with research explicitly and systematically, as well as teaching children the act of engaging in decoding and encoding, both in context and out of context. So we're going to be continuing with talking about teaching these particular elements because we're going to be focusing on sound spelling relationships today across alphabet, general sound spellings, and high frequency words. But as we do this, we will also be talking about engaging children in the act of using these sound spelling relationships to read and spell words. So we will really be talking about the first 2 buckets here. I guess you could even say the first 3, because as soon as they're engaging, it is a type of practice. And we'll be really thinking about how we can bring those to bear, again, mostly in that whole group setting, but as necessary for children in other settings as well. So one of the big themes in the book is that I talk about some of the tenets of effective foundational skills instruction. And I talk about these in relation to every chapter. These include being systematic and explicit, being efficient and effective in our instruction, responding to students' needs, and integrating with and applying things to real reading and writing. Today, I particularly want to drill in on this idea of explicitness and systematicity. We hear this all the time when people are talking about phonics. I think that from my perspective, this is probably the number one thing you hear when people start talking about phonics, is that it needs to be explicit and it needs to be systematic. So I want to take a moment to dive into what that really means and why we know from research that this is essential. So what does it mean to be explicit? Well, it pretty much just means that we need to tell children exactly what they need to know, and ideally in precise and concise language. Explicit can be contrasted with implicit. So an implicit move to try to teach a letter might be, we're going to read a poem. And in this poem, we're going to hear a lot of words that start with the same sound. While I'm reading, I'm going to track the print with my finger. I want you to try to think of which letter makes the sound that we're focusing on by listening and by watching my finger. That would be an implicit way of trying to teach a letter sound relationship. In contrast, an explicit way of teaching this would be saying something as straightforward and simple as the letter B spells the sound B. Everybody say B. And then teaching children exactly what they need to know about using that letter to both read and spell. The second part of the explicit and systematic is systematic, of course, which systematic means that we're teaching with a scope and sequence that is logical and fully covers necessary content. The opposite of systematic would be if we were teaching things kind of when they made sense or when an opportunity presented itself. A big example of this might be in previous decades, teachers might teach phonics when it comes up in a text. So for example, if a child had never read EA, spelling the long E sound, and they came upon the word eek in a text, the teacher might say, oh, the way that we read that is that we know EA spells the long sound E. Now go ahead and read that word. By contrast, when we're systematic, we have a plan for exactly when we're going to teach all of the most common and many of the lesser common sound spelling relationships over time. And we make sure that it follows a logical thread. So we wouldn't necessarily want to teach, say, diphthongs before we finish teaching the alphabet, because that doesn't flow in a logical sequence of what we typically do in our classrooms. What's important to think about is that both of these operate best together when we are both explicit and systematic. And it operates at an even higher level when we're able to support this across the years, not just in our own classroom. In order to be truly systematic with all of the aspects of sound spelling relationships in particular, but really all foundational skills that children need, we need to have systematic coverage across all of the early years and into some of the later years as necessary. So if we really want to be systematic, we do need to make sure that we're having conversations with the teachers in the grades before and after us to ensure full coverage of the content so that all children have access. In this way, we can think about being systematic and explicit as equity moves, because we're giving children all equal access to the same content over time, and we're telling them exactly what they need to know so that it's not left up to chance as to who might happen to understand our implicit teaching or who might happen to see something in a text. Instead, being explicit and systematic means that we are giving everybody the same high quality information that everybody needs to become a reader and a speller. Beyond that, we also know from research that children do benefit from this style of teaching. We see that children benefit from explicitness across foundational skills. We see this in large scale studies and meta-analyses of phonics instruction, of phonemic awareness instruction, and morphology instruction. We see time and time again that explicitness, directly telling children what they need to know and how to do it and how to practice it, is beneficial. We also see that systematic and explicit instruction can prevent some reading difficulties, meaning that if we are explicit and systematic from the beginning, we are less likely to have children who need extra support later on. And finally, we know that this approach works. Being direct works in this particular domain, and it is not a motivation killer. So although it might feel counterintuitive if we are a teacher who generally teaches more in an inquiry way, in this particular area of instruction, it's critical that we are direct, and it's critical that we understand that it does in fact work. And I'll share a little bit more about this later, but we do actually know from different kinds of research that children enjoy the explicit experiences that they have in particular areas of foundational skills, for example, in alphabet instruction. So let's just talk briefly about what you're going to see in the book, and then we're going to get into our first topic of the day. So this session today is mostly about chapters 6 and 7 in Reading Above the Fray. Both of these chapters are all about the research that we have on the alphabet and sound spelling relationships, which obviously extend beyond just the alphabet. In these chapters, you're going to see descriptions of kind of business as usual versus research-based phonics, discussions about the importance of this knowledge for children, principles for great phonics instruction across alphabet and beyond, and of course, our instructional swaps. So let's get into our first topic of the day, and that's going to be alphabet instruction. And even if you don't teach the alphabet, if you don't teach kindergarten or PK or young fives, I hope that you can still take some truths out of this section to bring into other experiences that your children participate in. And of course, we're going to start out with a poll. Our first poll is, do children need to know all 26 common letter sounds of the alphabet to start decoding? Yes, no, or not sure?
I always love seeing those poll numbers go up. It tells us people are with us since we can't see them. So it's very exciting. We have 89% of people have 90% participation. So you let me know when you want me to share it.
Yes, awesome. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and share.
Okay.
And I love seeing this too, because so many of you did respond no. They do not need to know all 26 common letter sounds to start decoding. Now, I chose this poll question just to get your appetite whetted for this idea about alphabet instruction, because the end goal, again, of alphabet instruction is to get kids into decoding and encoding as soon as we can, so that we can then get kids into real reading and writing as soon as we can. And actually, we see in research studies that children do not need to know all 26 letter sound relationships to learn how to decode words. Obviously, they can't learn how to decode a word with a letter they haven't learned yet, but they can start practicing this act of decoding earlier than we might think. Indeed, some research studies that successfully teach children to decode words, oftentimes that kids know 15, maybe even 13 letter sound relationships. And in some current curriculum, like the UFly Foundations curriculum that came out last year, I believe that they teach children about decoding after only maybe 3 or 4 letters. And we do hear anecdotally that children are experiencing success. So when we're thinking about the alphabet today, and I talk about what the research tells us is the optimal way to teach the alphabet, I want you to keep in mind that some of the reasons why what I'm discussing is the most optimal way is because it's going to give us the ability to give children much faster access to starting the process of learning to decode and encode. And when we give kids a longer runway to practice those skills, we're more likely to be setting them up for success. So what is the research on alphabet instruction? Well, we know a couple things from the research that are pretty clear. First, we know that alphabet instruction is best when it's fast. Generally, we see that we want to be teaching at least 3 letters a week, and we do want to get this done before winter break. We see in research that children benefit more from faster style alphabet instruction than long alphabet instruction like letter a week instruction. This is for a few reasons, but one reason is because when we teach a letter a week, children are not going to know anything about the last letter in that sequence, which is often Z, until the very end of the year. So that means that they could not possibly be decoding or spelling words with the letter Z until May. Obviously, that might not matter that much to you because you might say, well, we don't really use Z that much. But that long lag time is giving children way too limited amount of practice actually using letter sound relationships to do something with them. We also know from research, and this might be kind of surprising, that the children who benefit the most from a faster pace of alphabet instruction, such as when we get the whole alphabet in before winter break, are actually the children who come into kindergarten with the least amount of knowledge. Again, we can think about this in the same way when we're thinking about, well, what happens at the end of the year if we haven't learned Z yet? A lot of kids are coming into our classrooms already knowing quite a bit about the alphabet. So we are set it up for inequities in reading at the very beginning. But if we help our children who maybe don't have as much alphabet knowledge come in, get that knowledge faster, they are able to catch up with their peers in a quicker way, and they're able to start using that knowledge again to read and spell. So maybe we won't have as many inequitable outcomes in the long run. So if we teach the alphabet faster, we're giving kids greater access to starting to use the alphabet. The second reason that this is really helpful is because it gives us a larger amount of time to identify children who are needing extra support. If we wait until May or June to assess, did my kindergartners learn the alphabet, there's almost nothing you can do about that. They're going to first grade, and if they don't know the alphabet, that you might not have time to give them any support in learning the alphabet. Instead, if you aim to teach your whole class the alphabet in the first part of school, then you have the entire second part of school or more in order to support those children who need even more time with individual letter sound knowledge to make sure that everybody can leave kindergarten being really confident in the alphabet and hopefully being confident in using the alphabet to read and spell CBC words. The next thing that we know about the alphabet is that actually we want instruction to be decontextualized. This might be kind of surprising, but again, back to what I was talking around explicitness and systematicity, we actually want to just tell children clearly and concisely exactly what they need to know about the alphabet. This comes from some very interesting research where researchers actually compared what happens if we teach children the alphabet within the context of poems and stories versus what happens if we teach children the alphabet just straightforwardly, showing them the letter, teaching them the name, teaching them the sound. Now, you might guess that children in the decontextualized experience had better learning outcomes, and they did. But what you might not think about is that actually children in that protocol that was decontextualized enjoyed it more. Children self-reported that they had more fun and were more engaged in decontextualized alphabet experiences compared to the ones that were embedded in storybooks. Their teachers and the researchers also noticed that children were far more engaged and on task in the decontextualized experience. So when we think about our alphabet instruction, even though we certainly might want to include other things in our day, like shared readings that might include aspects of our alphabet instruction, when we are teaching a letter, we want to be clear, we want to be concise, and we want to be explicit so that children know exactly what it is that they need to know about this letter. Finally, we also know that right now, research suggests that the best way to teach the alphabet is to teach the name, the sound, and the form simultaneously. There's been a lot of conversation about whether or not we should teach the alphabet names. At this time, the research has not been able to conclude that we should not be teaching alphabet names. And most research does conclude that we should be teaching all three of these elements simultaneously. We may want to foreground the sound because that's what we're going to use to read and spell, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to teach the name at all. And last, alphabet instruction is best when our teacher language is super tight and concise, and our focus is on children practicing. In some research studies, we see that children benefit the most from protocols where kids are engaged in 70 opportunities to match a sound with a formation over the course of 3 days or so. So we're thinking about an enormous number of practice opportunities for children to look at the form of a letter and say the sound, or hear the sound and point to a form, or do both of those actions with the name as well. So what does this actually sound like? Well, this is an excerpt from the book, and this routine is in the alphabet chapter, so you can take a look at this in more detail later on. But essentially, we want to follow the same routine every time so that children know what to expect and they can focus in on their learning. And we're telling them again exactly what they need to know. This is our new letter, C, say, and we might show them the target word, a target word with that initial sound the same. We might even use an embedded picture, as research suggests that does support children in acquiring letter sound knowledge. And we're going to help children identify that letter, practice finding it, maybe in a mix of magnetic letters, and we're going to support them in understanding how to handwrite that letter as well. We do see in research that handwriting does have an impact on children's spelling and writing outcomes, which are both reciprocally related to reading. So we do know that we need to be supporting children in understanding that formation as well. We also know that we might not actually end up needing to spend the same amount of time on every single letter. Letter difficulty might mean that we have different instructional needs. So one way that we might teach the alphabet would be to teach all 26 letters each one day for each letter. And then we might spend a differing amount of time on the letters that are easier or harder for our class to learn. Or we might spend 2 days on every letter, and then we might change how we are using, say, that 5th day of the week. If we're teaching 3 letters, we might spend a shorter amount of time on that last letter. But ultimately, what we're doing when we are accelerating our alphabet instruction is we are giving ourselves more time to differentiate. So once we've gone through all of the letters once, we do need to do a check-in, assess children's knowledge, and then be sure to follow up on the letters that children do not know yet. So some final tips for the alphabet and additional research findings to keep in mind. If you do not have a scope and sequence for the alphabet and you are trying to construct a new one, start with some letter sounds that you can blend together. This will help get children, again, to that blending and decoding factor. For example, you might want to start with things like M, A, S, and then maybe you add on a T. And then children can start actually practicing decoding math and stats from the very beginning. They're going to need your help, but we can start getting them through that process and that thinking. Second, if you are having, especially if you are thinking about how you can support young children in preschool, consider adding some movement. There was a fascinating study that came out last year that showed that children who engaged in full body movement in order to remember an alphabet sound actually had superior alphabet learning compared to their peers who either didn't do any movement or just did movement with their hand. So if you really want to get wild, consider having a movement that children can do with their full bodies for each sound. But be careful not to think about multisensory approaches and movement as silver bullets. In research over time, in meta-analyses of these sorts of instructional approaches, we don't necessarily see that they are superior compared to other research tested approaches. So we can add them on when it makes sense, but don't expect it to suddenly change everything in your classroom. Third, don't forget about the connectivity of phonemic awareness with alphabet knowledge. Ensure that you remember everything we talked about last week and are cohesively teaching children phonemic awareness and the alphabet simultaneously to get them into that space where they can start decoding and encoding words. And finally, ensure that you distribute practice across time. Make sure that children get continual practice with letter sound relationships, not just one day of practice. So even though we're introducing the letters faster, we want to make sure that we are continuing the practice of all of those letters over time. We see in research that consistent review cycles of letter and letter sound relationships are one impactful aspect of alphabet learning. So what is our swap for this? Well, we're going to swap out an idea of alphabet all year for an idea of speedier alphabet. And if you are currently teaching kindergarten or you're teaching the alphabet in any grade level and you're doing a letter of week, then next week or even tomorrow, I would suggest that you try out the speedier routine that's in the book on page 86 to introduce a letter this week, maybe even 2 letters this week, and see how it goes, see how it feels for you and your students. All right, now we're going to move on to part 2. We're going to extend past our talk about alphabet into sound spelling instruction. And we're going to start with another poll. How many practice opportunities do you think you typically give children in one whole class phonics lesson?
The Q&A is alive and well today, Dr. Lindsay. So if we don't have time to answer these here, maybe we can get these into the Padlet. Would that be a good place for people to put them if we don't have time to get to them here?
Great question. Yes, I'll try to get to the questions at the end. I would like to also mention that I did see that there are people adding questions to the Padlet, and I have reserved time this week to answer those questions. So if you have questions there, hopefully they will get answered soon as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Of course. All right, we are up to almost 80%. Okay, just another 10 seconds. How many practice opportunities do you think you're giving children in one whole class phonics lesson? Wow, these 9 folks who've answered more than 50, that is quite impressive. All right, let's go ahead and send that poll out, Annie. Great. Okay, so we see most of us are around 10 to 20. I totally understand that and think that that is typical. I recently did a little audit for myself of different phonics curricula and counted, and most of them have about 19 practice opportunities in that whole class space. So I want you to keep this in mind while we start talking about our whole class phonics instruction. So what is the research on sound spelling instruction beyond just talking about alphabet instruction? Well, it's fairly straightforward. First, we know that it's best when we're systematic, explicit, and routine. Children do thrive off of routines in this particular learning space. That might not always be true, but in foundational skills, we continually see that children thrive off of routine. Second, we know that instruction is best when it's focused on actual reading and spelling. That doesn't mean that it's only focused on reading and spelling in context. That means that we're focused on real words and on reading and spelling real words, not just on hearing the sounds in isolation and writing just the letter or letters that make that sound. We also know that it's best when we have a combination of isolated and contextualized practice. Again, that decontextualized practice for children where we're doing just words without a kind of context is critical for solidifying these skills. But so is contextualized application in books that we read and write. We also see that instruction is best when we have some repetition of words. You might recall in our first session, we talked about orthographic mapping and how generally we see that readers need 1 to 8 times of seeing and decoding a word to hold that word in a long-term memory or in an orthographic map. So we do see that some repetition, especially over time, is supportive of children's learning. We also know that instruction in phonics and sound spelling is best when we have some supportive feedback. So when we can make sure that we're telling children if they are or are not correct and how to fit. And finally, when it is necessary, which is true in particular for our multilingual and older learners, but also anytime we're giving children a real word that is not a word that they would ever have known the meaning of, it's important to combine sound spelling instruction with word meaning instruction. What does that mean? That means that if we are teaching children how to decode CVC words, and we are using a decodable text about a child dancing, but instead of saying dance, since it's a decodable, it says jig, J-I-G, then we need to probably pause. And after children have recognized that word by decoding the sounds and saying jig and looking up at you, we take a second to explain the meaning in a child-friendly way to ensure that we are not creating readers that can read a lot of nonsense words but can't make sense of it, but giving kids access to, again, all of the information that they need for an orthographic map, which is the sounds, the pronunciation, the spelling, and also the meaning. We also see in research that this is really particularly important when we're thinking about children who are older, who are still learning to decode words. And again, our multilingual learners who need to have that oral vocabulary in order to be successful. So what does it really sound like to introduce a sound spelling relationship? Well, again, just like with the alphabet, it can sound very straightforward. We can simply tell children, we're learning a new sound, we're learning a new spelling. Here it is. Say it after me. Let's listen for it. Let's spell it. Let's practice seeing it both read and spelled. And then let's move into some activities where we get to read and spell. It's also important to know that even young children, even we see at the very beginning of learning, in research, sometimes they do activities with 2 letters really, really early, like before children even have full alphabet knowledge, which I personally wouldn't suggest, but it is something that we see in research sometimes, that children can handle understanding the 2-letter spellings and even more do make sense, and they can understand how those represent a single sound. And we see that that is certainly possible in kindergarten, as well as obviously in grades later than that. So what are some tips for phonics? Well, first, let's be concise and consistent, telling children exactly what they need to know in the same format with every new spelling and sound that they might be learning. Second, as I discussed earlier, be systematic across grades, not just in one grade level, to make sure that we're exposing all of those common spellings over years. Third, we might need to increase our own knowledge. Even I still need to learn sometimes about particular spellings. Sometimes people ask me, oh, what about this spelling? And I realize I need to do a little learning myself. As proficient readers, a lot of this knowledge is not always explicit to us unless we do a little extra work to remember it if we learned it previously, or to learn it completely new if we didn't learn to read this way as young children. Or of course, maybe we've just forgotten. But we can always increase our knowledge about what spelling, what sound spelling relationships exist, and some of the flexibly applied rules that we use to figure out when to use those spellings. And finally, when we're doing phonics, we want to make sure we do not forget spelling. Spelling will improve reading and vice versa. If we want better readers, we can focus on giving children a lot of practice building and making words and using those sound spelling relationships to spell. So going back to our thoughts about what does it actually sound like, thinking about how do we explicitly introduce sound spelling relationships. When we're thinking about our whole class phonics, we obviously have 2 components. We have this explicit introduction, and then we have a lot of practice. And I want you to think about what language exists for introducing these. And I think you can probably tell just by looking at these that one is concise and precise, and one is getting all over the place. So even though it might not always be natural for us, I would charge you to think about writing out exactly what you want to say about a letter or a spelling and the sound it represents, and saying just exactly that, and not getting too far into the weeds of all these other things. We want to be precise so that children hear us and they know what we meant, instead of having to meander through something with us. So instead of telling children, oh, we're going to learn something crazy about this ALL, telling children exactly what they need to know. Sometimes when LL comes after vowels A, O, and U, it changes the vowel sound a bit. So ALL spells all, like in the words tall and small. Say all, and then we can move on to actually using it. So what do we do to actually use it? Well, we can practice sound spellings in ways that are ensuring that children are actually actively spelling and actively reading. One example of this might be word building, which is a research tested technique. In word building, what we would do is we would have first children build one particular word, like the word set. And, or let's see if that is not going to work with my example here, is it? But we might say, build the word sat. Now change the first sound to a, what word do you have? Cat. Or we might flip our prompts and say, okay, you have the word cat, change the middle sound to and now you have cut. So we can use different promptings to either prompt children to encode and spell a word, or decode and need to change out a letter in order to read the word. In this way, we're giving children the ability to think flexibly as they participate in a multitude of actions with those sound spelling relationships. Another great thing about word building is that it's actual reading and spelling of words. It's not possible to use context or pictures. Unlike using, for example, a word sort where we ask children to be silent, where kids could really do that without reading the full word, you gotta actually be doing in order to participate in word building. It is possible to get it routinized and really fast, and it is something that we can do both whole class, small class, or individual. It's something that can be highly differentiated if we need it to be. So why this focus on practice? Why this focus on making your language more concise and leaving more time for practice? Well, it's because of this. In one study, we see that children benefited the most from whole class phonics instruction that had 1.8 practice opportunities per minute. That means that if we're thinking about a 20-minute phonics lesson, we're thinking about, is it possible to give children 40 opportunities for practice in this lesson? I know it seems like a heavy lift and we might not get there right away, but thinking about how we can increase children's practice time is one way that we can increase their learning, and decrease our talking time is one of the big ways that we can do this. So I leave you with this. Our phonics instruction should be the loudest time of day in our classrooms. Every single child should be decoding or encoding words, and that is going to be loud. It should be productive loud, but if all of our children, especially in the K-1 space, are not prepared to do this in their heads yet, they need to be saying out loud so that they can be doing. So we should be listening for phonics classrooms that are loud. So finally, sorry, I keep going backwards with these. The final swap here is, instead of thinking about phonics practice at random, ensuring that our phonics is focused on decoding and encoding. So if you want to try this tomorrow, try adding something like word building, seeing how it goes, seeing what you see different about how your children are experiencing this time. And it's okay if it doesn't go great the first time. It takes a while to build these routines. Another swap you might consider is swapping out that lengthier teacher talk for concise and precise instruction. Look at how you're planning to introduce the next sound spelling relationship and think about, how could I make this more concise? Is there anything I could say that would be more precise? Is there any additional information I need to add about the spelling that would help children in their reading and also in their writing? All right, and now we're going to get into our final section, part 3, all about high frequency words. And so our last poll of the day is, all high frequency words, fill in the blank.
As people are answering this too, Julia, we did have on the read right where we did last time, we talked about word ladders and walked through like that could be a part of what word building could be, right, where you're swapping out the sound or like word chains or whatever. So some of those examples are there. Looks like we're up to almost 90% people participating here.
Love that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close out the poll. Thank you for participating. So we had some differences across this. Some folks saying they're all spelled irregularly, some saying are common in written English, and some saying must be memorized. So let's find out. So the main takeaway from our conversation today around high frequency words, I hope, is going to be this. If we take decoding and orthographic mapping seriously, then we have to understand that this is how all words work. High frequency words are just words. There's nothing in particular about them that makes them different in terms of their spelling compared to all other words. They are just words. So if we're taking it seriously that this is how children recognize words, and indeed how we do too, then we've got to think about high frequency words as words. High frequency words are the words that are the most common in written English. For example, we know that about 2,000 words are estimated to cover 70 to 90% of all written text. In the early years, we tend to think about high frequency words more about the top 100 or even 300 words. We do not need to be thinking about teaching children 2,000 high frequency words, but I do think it's interesting to know that if we look at text for adults too, we see that there are some words that we just see all the time. We do know from research that high frequency word knowledge does impact reading fluency. So they are essential for us to give children access to these words that are going to allow them to be fluent readers. But they are not just so unusual that we have to memorize them. They're not all irregularly spelled, and they are not best remembered via direct memorization. When we think about decoding high frequency words, we might notice that actually all words can be broken up into their sound spelling relationships or into their phoneme grapheme correspondences. For example, we can break up the into th and E spelling long E. We can break up of, one of the most irregular seeming high frequency words. We can still break that up into two sounds, and O is spelling that short U sound, and F is spelling that B sound, which is a little unusual, especially in kindergarten when we're trying to teach this word, but it is not crazy town. You just need to memorize this as a whole unit. Same with something like U. You can break it up into multiple sounds that you can map directly onto spellings. So when we think about the principles for teaching high frequency words, we want to teach children to decode them. The first principle is to help children understand that these are temporarily irregular. In many cases, high frequency words are decodable with normal sound spelling knowledge, but we need kids to read these words before our scope and sequence gets to that knowledge, because we really just can't access any text without them. For example, a word like the, we often teach it way before we're going to get to digraphs and way before we're going to get to the final E potentially being a long E if it's the only vowel in a word. So we are teaching that earlier, but it's actually a word that children could reasonably read with later sound spelling knowledge. So help them realize this is only a weird word right now. Second, it can be helpful to teach them within a concept. For example, if we're teaching consonant digraphs, we can teach or revisit she, they, thee, their, etc. Noticing that these digraphs exist, occasionally they might have a slightly different sound than anticipated, and that's an excellent opportunity to help children engage flexibly in applying this knowledge to words. Third, we might teach them in similar chunks, like so, no, and go. When we do that, we can help children realize that, oh, when a word ends with an O, it might spell its long sound. In that way, supporting their ever-growing knowledge of sound spelling relationships, not just of individual high frequency words. And finally, we want to be careful to not tell children that these words just aren't decodable. Even as I showed you, the word of is decodable. Even though every part of it represents an irregular or uncommon sound, it's still decodable. And so are high frequency words. We can break them into parts and we can map each part, the sound to the spelling. And that is the best way that we can understand and remember these words, because it is essentially mimicking the act of decoding regular words as well. So what do we want to swap out for here? Instead of asking children to use high frequency words as kind of this memorization on site, we want to think about them as words that we are going to introduce and support kids in learning in the same way that we would support them in decoding any word. Next time we introduce a high frequency word, break it into those grapheme phoneme correspondences and tell children exactly how they map onto one another for that particular word. So finally, we've reached our conclusion for today, and then we are going to take a look at the Q&A. The three major things. Number one, let's teach the alphabet faster. Number two, let's focus our phonics on student practice and high quality practice of reading and spelling words. And number three, teach high frequency words like other words. Teach children how to decode them. So again, if you choose to take a swap from today, and I had 4 swap options for you to think about, I would love for you to tell me about it. You can find me anywhere on social media under my name. You can go to my website, you can email me. I would love to hear about what you try out. All right, now let's take a look at the Q&A. And Annie, just cut me off when we're done with our time. Let's see if we have any. Actually, I am not sure about the decodables sequence on text project. It is an unusual scope and sequence that I know, but I don't know. You'll have to poke around on their website and see if you see it. Okay, next question. Can everyone see these questions, Annie, or just me?
I think everyone can see them. If you all click on the Q&A, I think everyone can see that they've what's been put in.
Okay, I will try to read the question to you though first. All right, Melissa asked, what is the best picture to represent X on an alphabet chart, Fox or X-ray? I prefer Fox, and I just tell children this is unusual. This is the only letter that we're actually going to listen for the final sound. But X-ray, you have to work quite a bit harder to hear the sound of X, because it's actually coming the way that letter name works is that we're hearing the sound at the end of the letter name instead of at the beginning. So if you say fox, so you hear that KS sounds at the end, which is the sound that we want kids to hear for X. Okay, someone asked about how this relates to speech and print and how some teachers are being encouraged not to use letter names. So again, in my work, I really try to look at the research that we currently have and see what conclusions we can draw and bring that into practice. And right now, we don't have definitive evidence that we shouldn't be teaching letter names. And we see that there is a benefit from teaching them. So that's why I think we should still be teaching them. But again, I do think we should foreground sounds, and most of our practice around the alphabet should be focused on letter sounds. Okay, Michelle asked, can you say something again about handwriting? Yep, so we should be teaching handwriting. Letter formation is very critical for children's success in spelling and in writing. We know in the research that those two aspects of literacy are influenced by children's abilities in letter formation or handwriting. It's not as clear how letter formation is related to reading outcomes. So we might not necessarily be as urgent around handwriting in reading. However, here's the caveat. We know that children's reading outcomes are related to their spelling outcomes. So that brings the urgency right back up, because we want children to be good readers and spellers. And if we are supporting their handwriting, they are more likely to be good spellers, and good spellers are more likely to be good readers. So that's a very roundabout way of saying that, especially in kindergarten, we should certainly be supporting children's formation as well to ensure that they are on a track where they can become good spellers and writers. Cassandra asked, is there a certain video or program about the whole body movements? No, this was just a singular research study that I found very interesting. But they were doing, if I remember correctly, they were doing movements related to the sound, if that helps you. Again, the 3 takeaways, we will show those again. Should we teach high frequency words in context too? Absolutely. If we are giving children the opportunity to read a word in isolation, we should also try to give them the opportunity to read that word in context so that they are able to really use that word in text.
If you are looking, Q&A.
Yeah, I think, are we maybe one more question?
Yeah, let's do one more, and then maybe we can put the other ones in the Padlet.
Great.
So I can, okay, thanks.
Okay, I see a couple other questions that we might actually get to next week. And then one last question. My district uses a letter a week routine. Do I have suggestions for speeding this up? Absolutely. I would say, let's take a look at what's happening across that week and start being a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Ready to cut. Taking a look at all of the routines that are included and really reflectively, carefully ask ourselves, is this meeting our goal? Are kids reading and spelling the alphabet letters? How often? How could we increase that? Which are the aspects of this that are actually not giving our children more access to this? And then we could use that as a way to cut down on the additional bulk that might exist in a curriculum and focus our time on actual alphabet learning. And then, of course, if those activities are useful for other reasons, we can return to them after we have had that first exposure of alphabet learning to ensure everybody's getting the alphabet in those first months of kindergarten. Awesome. All right. Thank you all for being here today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Annie.
Thanks, Julia. I feel a little bit selfish that I'm even taking back over because everyone wants to hear more from you. We will wrap up just a few things because those of you who can't stay, I'll just give you the little quick preview of things that we will do in the next session. So that way you can know that. But Julia, I mean, clearly everyone wants to keep hearing more. And there was a question, will we be offering this again? We'll be offering something with coaches and teachers for the fall, and as whatever feedback you're giving us helps us know what you would like us to offer at MAISA. So the more you tell me in your feedback, like, Annie, please make sure this is put on your agenda. We want this to be offered again because people want it. That helps me to know what to advocate for and where to put our time and energy. So please do let us know if this would be valuable to offer again with Dr. Lindsey, and know that for coaches, we have another opportunity we'll be discussing at our coaches quarterly meeting with Dr. Lindsey in person next week. So very exciting. Okay. So, whoops, I'm in the wrong thing. So we are going to talk really quickly about Read, Write, Roar. And we'll talk in depth more, but the lessons I'll show will be connected to the Enhanced Alphabet Knowledge Protocol, which is in Dr. Lindsey's book. It will also be connected to teaching high frequency words. There will be a slide that you can have access to that lets you know what these lesson types are on Read, Write, Roar, the skills that we would be teaching and leveraging in these lesson types, the essentials connections, and then where these would be found within your ELA standards for the state of Michigan. So this will all be in here for you. Also keep putting things in Reading Above the Fray Padlet. And if you did have a damaged book, someone, I think it was Terry in the Q&A said, hers was still, she has a damaged book. So just email me and I will make sure that we get you into the queue to get a brand new one. Preparing for webinar 4, if you can make sure you have chapters 7 and 8 read, and we'll be making connections to essentials 4, 5, and 6, a little bit of essential 7. And your learner guide will keep updating with any other links that you need or want for going forward. So we're going to launch into our word builders. Liberty, if you don't mind putting in the chat, which you may have already done this, could you put the feedback link in that chat for us, pretty please? Thank you so much for all the help. So those of you who are popping out now have the feedback link, and those of you who are staying on will also do the feedback link for you at the end of this. And we can save all the Q&A to get that into the Padlet. Thank you, Liberty, for double checking on that for us. So everything that you've asked will be answered and put into the Padlet for you. Okay, so here we go. The sketch form, that's the one that's going into the chat right now. And then, well, so that's in the chat right now. And then I will send it out later to you as well. And your exit ticket again is in the chat. So please put that in, put your sketch information on the feedback form that Liberty just put in. So thank you all for reminding me that you needed that. And we meet next Monday, the 8th. That's our final session. We will be sending out another email this week. It'll have all the information like you got last week. So May 8th, 4 to 5 or 4 to 5:30 if you can stay on. Okay. I'm talking at the speed of light, but here we go. So let's think about our Read, Write, Roar lessons and how those might be able to support you. I want to do a little fun activity with you, even though I'm not with you, which I kind of was, I could see you, is I'd like you to think about the letter B, and I would like you to think about how you say the sound for letter B, and then just say it out loud for yourself right now. Okay, very good. And then I want you to think about, you've said the letter sound for B. Hopefully your letter B sounded something like this. B. Not B or B, but B. There's going to be a little bit of co-articulation with the little in there, but you don't want it to be like a B, because then we're adding in extra sounds. So let's think about how you would form the letter B. Some of you might be with a colleague right now. How would you make the letter B? And what words might you say if you were teaching that to the children in front of you? So you've told them this is the letter B. B represents the sound B. And if you're going to say, this is how you make the letter B, what would you do for that? Sometimes this seems like a tricky question. It's not a trick question, really. It's just something I'd like you to think about. Now, when I was teaching first grade forever ago, I would say something, what we used for our language was, I would say, we're going to slide down, climb up, and curve. Slide down, climb up, and curve. That might be completely different than what you said. I would have also shown them on paper a green dot of where to start. I would say start at the top, we're going to go top to the bottom. I would have given them an explanation, but it would have been slide, climb, and a curve. Now, if you're in a room with someone, or even if you just heard my explanation, yours could be very different. So one of the things I asked us to do this for is that we can think about, if you use certain words in your classroom and in your practice, but if you have a colleague across the hall who uses a different set of words or a different kind of paper, or you're not saying the sound for letter B in the same way, consider what that does for the kids in our rooms. And someone specifically asked about children in special education. I think about the children that I used to have the opportunity to serve. And sometimes they saw me, they saw their special education support people, and they also saw a literacy specialist as well. If the three of us were all saying the sound differently, and if the three of us were all making the letter with different formation pathways, think about how confusing that is for kids. So I do this activity when I've done professional learning around alphabet instruction, because usually people start laughing and realize, like, sometimes they've never thought about the words that they use or what they say. And sometimes they realize, oh my goodness, we're doing completely different things. We're on the same team. Yes, this is confusing for kids. So kind of the challenge is, can you talk to the people at your school? When we think about our theory of action and Michigan children at the center, we want to make life as easy, accessible, and direct for them as possible. So if we can use the same language and use the same paper and try and use something that's research supported as possible. There's the two that I can think of offhand. Handwriting Without Tears has some research support behind it, and so does Size Matters. I know Dr. Duke has come out with her own Great First 8, and my assumption is that that's going to be research supported. That she's put research into it, and eventually there'll be a study that comes out. But thinking about what we use for our language is really important. So as we consider this, one of the things we're going to talk about today is a protocol that Dr. Lindsey does mention in her book by Jones and colleagues. So it was Jones, Clark, and Rutzel. And they have something called the Enhanced Alphabet Knowledge Protocol, and people often call it EAK, E-A-K. This is a protocol that takes about 10 to 12 minutes. You have explicit instruction that will assist with writing fluency. It also incorporates phonological skills, specifically phonemic skills, because you're doing one letter when you're doing this. And it helps to support that letter a day, or at least 3 letters a week mindset and practice that we want to get into. It uses multiple senses when we do this, and it gives an authentic application. So when we think back to Essential 1, we want kids to have real world relevant opportunities to practice things that we're doing. So I love this protocol. It was the first thing that Dr. Tortorelli, she shared this with us at our first training in 2016. Some of you in the space might have been with us for that. And I gave it to every kindergarten and first grade teacher that I served as a way to think about those children that didn't know their letter names and sounds, and as a quick protocol you could use in Tier 1 or Tier 2 or Tier 3. And I've had the opportunity to work with many different teachers that have used it. Now, this was specifically tested in kindergarten, so I'm just going to put that out there right away. Though it was not tested in pre-kindergarten, we did apply the protocol in pre-K, and we had so much growth and progress in pre-K. It actually forced the kindergarten teachers to have to switch their curriculum to not do a letter a week, because when my son was in kindergarten, it was a letter a week. So they weren't getting through the whole alphabet until like February. And as Dr. Lindsey points out, that's pretty problematic, right? Especially if you want kids really reading predictable text by the end of kindergarten. And if we look at what the standards are. So what we have based on research is that what we want is for kids by the end of, and I put this in the chat in answer to a question, we want pre-K kids to leave with 15 lowercase and 18 uppercase letters, a mix of 15 and 18. And we don't have the research specifically on how many sounds. We tested it with 10 sounds, and kids were really able to do that quite well, unless they had something else going on that was hindering them from that. And this was the protocol that we used with some small tweaks. So I bring this up because today we're going to look at on Read, Write, Roar. We used this same framework in the lessons called Letter Heroes. And so on Read, Write, Roar, we have a type called Letter Heroes. And during the pandemic, I had done it before we, and anyone really knew what they were doing. I was just offering some free classes called ABC Superhero. And so when we made Michigan Learning Channel, we had the opportunity to call it Letter Heroes. So it uses the Enhanced Alphabet Knowledge Protocol. It provides a framework for teaching letters and sounds through direct instruction and repeated exposure and multisensory learning. So when I would do it, we would do like skywriting, or I would say like trace it on the table or trace it on your hand, whatever letter that you're doing. There's opportunities for that with kids. And then this really connects with Essential 5 and that specific piece around handwriting that was brought up in the chat for Essential 6. So this is Jill Erforth, who might even be in this space with us today. I don't know if she's here or not. And this example for Jill, who is in Macomb ISD, Jill was teaching letter K in the lesson we're going to look at. The very simple amount of materials that you need, okay, just letter cards, some chart paper or whiteboard. She used a sentence strip. And the teacher needs to know the enhanced alphabet knowledge protocol that's linked in the learner guide for you. I have like kind of a step-by-step little outline for you if that's helpful. And you want to make sure that when you're doing the pathways, you're showing where you want to start so that kids aren't drawing letters. This helps them to have that fluidity. So that way, when they're writing, they have more fluency in their writing. They're not always trying to think of how to make a letter. And what I would say is when I modeled this in classrooms with children in front of me, one of the things I would say for the application, because there's always an application part in enhanced alphabet knowledge protocol, you do the letter. This is what the letter looked like, uppercase, lowercase. You say this is the sound of the letter. You have them repeat the sound. You have them look back and forth to do uppercase K or lowercase k or whatever letter you're doing. You have them repeat the sounds with you, which you'll see Jill do. And then you give them a chance to find it in context. So we're going to see Jill do that on a sentence strip. In classrooms, I would invite kids to just bring any book, anything with print on it up to the carpet where I was teaching the lessons or rug, wherever. And I give them like a bingo chip. And it was like, green, but clear. And I would say, after I taught the letter, I would say, now I want you to take your bingo chip and see if you can find this letter in the book. And what was kind of fun for these little kindergartners is they would take these like huge books up. It didn't matter. I didn't care if they couldn't read the book because that wasn't the purpose of this. This wasn't for them to read the book. The purpose of this was to see if they could find this letter in context and see where it turned up. We also had hunts around the room. Can you find a K on labels around the room or on a book that I'm reading or wherever that on a child's nameplate? So there's lots of opportunities to get up and move around with this. You really do have a lot of autonomy, but the tenets of this is that it is explicit. You know the letter name, you know the letter sound, you know the letter formation pathway you're going to tell the children to use, and hopefully you've agreed upon it as a group. And I've just seen in schools that have used it, they've had a lot of success with children with that. So we're going to watch a little clip from Read, Write, Roar of Jill doing this. And the lesson is also linked in the learner guide for you. So let me just pull this up. I have to get out of this screen. Sorry. And get to our video right here.
It's time for our letter of the day. Are you ready to be letter heroes?
Sorry, I love Mrs. Town, but this was not the one I was going to show you. You also should know that there's another one with Jody Pung, who's also amazing. But since I went over the letter K one, that is the one that I wanted to show you. Thank you for your patience. Let's see, where did I put hers? Okay, there we go. And this starts at 54.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Erford. Today, you are all going to be letter heroes. You'll be learning the name, the sound, and how to write the letter K. This is the letter K. This is the uppercase letter K. This is the lowercase letter K. Let's practice naming the letter K. When I point to the letter, you say the letter. What letter is this? K. And this? K. What letter is this again? K. And one more time. What letter is this? K. The letter K represents the sound K, like in koala, like in kitten, and key, and kite, and kid. To make the sound K, I put my tongue at the top of my mouth towards the back, and I push the air through my mouth when I let go of my tongue and release my tongue, like this. K, K. You try it. K, K. Great job. Now let's practice saying the sound K. When I point to the letter, you say the sound. Ready? What sound? K. And what sound is that? K. Let me hear you say it again. K. Last time. What sound? K. Let's see if we can find the letter K in our sentence. Let's get out our magnifying glass and look closer at our sentence. The king has a pet kitten named Kitty. Let's take a close look. Do we see the letter K? No, that's our high frequency word. King. Yes, you see the letter K. Let's circle it. Let's keep reading. Do you see the letter K again in the sentence? Has a pet. Do you see one yet? The next word, kitten. There it is, the letter K. Let's circle it. Did you see another letter K in our sentence? In any of the words? Named Kitty. The letter K. Let's circle it. Did you notice that's an uppercase K for Kitty? Because that's the kitten's name. And we put an uppercase or capital letter at the beginning of names. We have 3 words in our sentence that have the letter K. King, kitten, and kitty. Great job, letter heroes.
Okay, so this next part you're seeing, it transitions out like it's a new part. That's right, but this will be the letter pathway instruction. And it looks like some of you are using specific pathways. That's great. And I'm answering some of your questions about using this with older kids. I'm just typing that into the chat now, or the Q&A now.
Let's practice writing the letter K. Let's practice writing the uppercase letter K first. Watch me on the lines. Begin at the top line, pull down, back up to the top line, slant in, slant out. Let's trace it. Get your tracing finger ready and trace it with me. Ready? Start at the top line, pull down, back up to the top line, slant in, slant out. Great. Now, let's get our pencil and let's write it together. All right, let's write it together. Ready? Start at the top line of your paper. Pull down, back up to the top, slant in, slant out. Let's practice writing another one together. Top of the line, pull down, back up to the top, slant in, and you got it, slant out. Great. Now let's practice writing the lowercase letter K. Watch me write the lowercase letter K. Start at the top line, pull down, middle line, slant in, then slant out. Let's trace it with our finger. Get your finger ready, and let's trace the lowercase letter K. Here we go. Start at the top line, pull down, middle line, slant in, slant out. Great. I think we're ready to write it now. Grab your pencil and let's practice writing the letter K. Start at the top line of your paper, pull down, middle line, slant in, you got it, slant out. Let's practice another one. Ready? With your pencil, start at the top line, pull down, middle line, slant in, you got it, slant out. Great job writing the uppercase letter K and the lowercase letter K. You did an amazing job, letter heroes, learning all about the letter K today. What letter is this? K. And what sound does it represent? Fantastic. Keep being a letter hero at home and be sure to keep on the lookout for the letter K when you're reading. We are going to learn.
Okay, so there was Jill, and I'm going to apologize because apparently, even though I literally opened this document earlier, it's not, oh, you know why it didn't work? Because it didn't copy all the letters. So I really apologize for that. I'm going to post it again, and it's supposed to say copy at the end. So if you try that now, it should work, but we're actually going to put a different one in for high frequency words. I'm very sorry that that link did not work. And let's see, someone asked, is this accessible to all the lessons? Yes. Oh, are the lessons written out? So that's a really good question. We don't have our lessons written out, but the enhanced alphabet knowledge protocol, I'm going to show you where on our, let's see, let me get to my agenda here. So in this agenda on page 2, this is your learner guide, right? So there's an each step-by-step presentation I had put together that walks you through like what you do for the enhanced alphabet knowledge protocol, and it breaks it apart step by step of exactly the words that they say. So all I did was like blow up the part that was like part 1 that's on this side, and part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, and part 6. So the other thing that's in here is a video link where Dr. Duke does a, she goes through the alphabet and names every letter of the alphabet and says the letter sound. So who better than Dr. Duke to do that for us? So that's included in there as well, if you want to make sure that you're all on the same page with saying the words correctly. And the other piece, that is there is the research behind letter heroes. This is this was just found online. It's easy to find online, but this just gives the synopsis of what the research was. We do have the full research article, which you can also just find online as well. But this walks through some of the tips and tricks and gives the whole lesson template out. So if you're thinking about trying to use this particular protocol, that's all in there for you. And that's what we gave to teachers to use on Read, Write, Work, so that we were kind of all on the same page. And Mrs. Pong does an awesome job too for kindergarten teaching those lessons as well. And so those of you who cannot, you can only type in a question and you're not seeing the answers to those. Oh, sorry. So I will make sure the questions and answers are put in the Padlet. We'll get those in there so you can all see all of those things together. Let's see. So thank you all for staying on with me right now. The next thing I wanted to talk with you about, where am I here? Let's make sure I give you the right link in the chat. Okay. So, this didn't come across right either. So here's something that Dr. Lindsey talked with us about words. Not only 4% of words are not decodable. So in some ways, I feel like that's pretty freeing as an educator, right? Because it tells us that we don't have to tell kids that just need to memorize these words, because there will be parts of them they can decode, or we can give them the code, right? Even for the word of, which isn't like decodable, we can tell them like all vowels can make the schwa sound, that they can all say the schwa, right? And so in of, it's the and then we can just tell them the F in this word makes the v, of. To me, I just found like, wow, that's really freeing. So we know they occur frequently in text. So it's really important that we give kids this instruction, but it's also really important we're not spending all day on this. Like at the most, we want to spend 5 minutes on this. We have linked in the learner guide, and I also have just what it looks like here. Dr. Duke and Dr. Heidi Mesmer, who wrote Letter Lessons and First Words, another excellent text to use as a resource, did this blog post way back in 2016, but it's still quite relevant. So that's in there for you to have a chance to look at, and outlines high frequency word instruction. And as I said, in the modules, there's a whole actual presentation on high frequency word instructions that you can have access to. So when we consider what we should be doing for high frequency word instruction, a lot of it is about like leveraging words, teaching words in pairs, being really explicit, not saying that you just have to memorize these things. That really gives kids and gives you, I think, some encouragement, empowerment, and some autonomy. So when we did the lessons on read, write, roar for high frequency words, this is just an example of like my prep as a teacher. What we did was we tried to align them. I always in my classroom and always as much as possible, try and align what I'm teaching to kids with something that we're studying. And so in particular for these, we were working on R blends. And so we had TR and GR. So I was thinking, well, let me find the high frequency words that first graders should know and pair those up when we're doing R blends. So that's why try and great were chosen for this. And then I made sentences up that matched with the content that we were teaching as much as possible when it made sense. But before I taught them, I made sure I went through the process myself of telling myself, okay, in the word try, it has 3 sounds. These are the sounds that are in try. It's the t, r, I, and it has 3 letters. And so I could tell kids how that word worked and say the t is represented by a T, the R is represented by letter R, and the I is represented with the letter Y in this word. And so again, like I just put Post-it notes out. So like, you know, you're in the middle of teaching, you're trying to get through a lot of stuff. I remember those days. So if you have yourself prepped ahead of time, you can reuse these things, you know, time and time again. So these are really short. They're the inside scoop on these. There's only 2 new words per lesson. Again, we're not spending more than 5 minutes on this. And so I'm going to show you a little clip. Instead of showing you the whole clip, you will have access to this whole clip. There's one of me doing trying great. And then there's Shernita doing, who's amazing first grade partner. We're just going to watch Shernita's part so that it's shorter. And I have that link. Is this the right link? I pulled it up ahead of time. Nope, there's Jody, who did such a great job. Here we go. Here's Shernita teaching hers.
Hello, learners. It's Ms. Rogers to talk about high frequency words. We learn these words because they're going to show up a lot when we are reading and writing. If we can understand how these words work and learn how to spell them, it will help us when we read and write them. So here we go. My first word today is the word all. I ate all of the ice cream. All, all, all. 2 sounds. Now let me hear you say all. Now let's say the sounds. All, all, Good job. Now, if I look at my word, it has 3 letters. The A says the ah sound. L says the l sound. So these 2 letters make 1 sound. When I put them together, it's all, all. A-L-L spells all. So I'm going to put this on my board and I want you to help me to write them. You can skywrite in the air, you can write on a sheet of paper or whatever you have at home. So let's write the word all. 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 My second word that I have for you is the word from. I received a letter from my friends. From. 4 sounds. Let me hear you say from. Now let's say the sounds. From. Good job. Now let's look at the word from. From has 1, 2, 3, 4 letters. The F says, the R says, the O in this word says, and the M says, So all of these letters put together sound like this. From. Let me hear you say from. Good job. So now we're going to try to write this word. Also, remember, you can write up in the sky with your finger or on paper or anything you have at home. So let's write the word from. From. So our two words today that we learned are all and from. Now, practice writing those words because once we practice, we can easily identify the words when we read and write them.
Okay, so we had a great question in the chat about Dr. Walpole's work, how to plan differentiated reading instruction. And I was pretty excited because I had a reading specialist as my cooperating teacher. So I was actually taught this way to teach high frequency words. It's just how it was done in my own practice. But then, like I said, the things that would change is how I gave kids practice with high frequency words. It would not be with flashcards. Yes, I had them word hunt in books. I did that, but I had them do flashcards. So I would take the flashcards part out, but my instruction was actually good and explicit. And yes, Dr. Walpole's is quite similar to that. So there is a resource. I was just writing back to Colleen Martell that she asked, is this the same as Dr. Walpole's? If you have the book, How to Plan Differentiated Reading Instruction, that is in there. And then if you look into the learner guide, I can put that link back in the chat. That has links to like everything I'm showing you right now. And I will get the link to my presentation also put in there, but it'll all be in the same link and it will just update for you. So there should be a link in there. Let's see, let me go here. When you get your learner guide, again, mine's in the PDF version, but it has high frequency words, lessons. Oh goodness, I did. Crying out loud. I thought that I put that in there. I put it in somewhere. So, oh, here it is. Under Literacy Essentials, the sample protocol to teach high frequency words is there on page 1. And so I just went through a protocol and give it to you. So I put green to start, red to end. So that's in there for you if that's helpful for your practice. And the other link that's in there for you is this student sheet that you help kids to think about what are patterns that you're studying. This is one of our research supported practices. If I know this word, it helps me know this word. So if I know the word one, it helps me read and write the word none. I'm just adding the to the front of it, right? So like one, none, done. We can teach those in patterns and pairs, and then it helps kids to see that connection. So those are in the learner guide for you to have as you would like access to them. The last thing I'm going to show you, because I'm realizing how late it is right now, and you're already, I know we started 2 minutes late, but now we're still 2 minutes late. This is a resource I put together after Dr. Duke had presented to us in the for our coaching network. I asked her if she could talk about high frequency words. It's just a hot topic. And so she gave us some guidance. So what I did was just capture that and took that with the research and put it into a document. So you'll have this access to this in my slides, which I still owe you. You will have the link in the learner guide. And it says pre-kindergarten, like no need to teach them. Why don't we? And the words are there of why. Kindergarten, teach a few. And that was a question someone had put in the chat that I answered around like, give kids what they need for access to be able to read predictable text, but don't get carried away in kindergarten. In first grade, we want to teach them, but still don't go overboard and have this recommendation. Dr. Walpole kind of says, stop at 200, right? We're not going up to 1,000 because she says beyond that, really you're teaching those words within like your content areas and they're going to show up there. So I hope this will be helpful to you as you're thinking about your work in your schools. Here's a picture that shows the tip sheets that I just opened up and showed you. And guess what? We're at the end. So I'm going to give you the feedback form in the chat again. And then I'm also going to make sure that you have access to the learner guide. And I know there were a couple things that were broken and I apologize for that. So we will make sure that those get fixed. But you have a lot of different, oops, I'm in the wrong thing. We have a lot of different resources for you. So I hope that this will be helpful for you. And thank you for being here with us today. This part is recorded too, so it will be accessible to you. And this is what should be showing up when you click on that link. And I will share out the link for, I can stop sharing. I will share out the link to the learner guide. So thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope you have a great Monday, and we will look forward to seeing you soon. And all of these things that are in the Q&A will get put into the Padlet or get the answers to you. So have a great night, and I'll be here if any other questions come up that are burning in the chat.